All right. So there are some great questions. You guys stuck around, so I know that there's some like engagement here. All right. So what are some unique use cases that have shown the biggest ROI that surprised you? That's a great question. So let's talk about return on investment. One of the things I mentioned earlier was how return on investment is often correlated to things like process automation and process connection. And so this was the slide earlier that I referenced there. And so one of the things that we did as an exercise, we took a number of customers. We took all of the new project requests. Project request is a broad term for this organization type, but all the requests that came in that were Copilot related. So this means we rolled out Copilot to teams, team-based nominations. Those teams adopted Copilot and then said, I want Copilot or AI to do this or that. And so they came up with all these ideas for what they want to do. Well, we looked at that as a thing we did for our customers, and we did this at scale across quite a few. And we looked at it and said, okay, how many of these are truly like the right answer today is Copilot, and how many are actually solved by Power Platform, are solved by like just Teams usage, like one-on-one stuff, SharePoint lists, whatever. Like how many of these can be solved with other capabilities that aren't really AI, they're not really Copilot. And the thing is, at the time, because this was quite extensive, it was 82% of them were not AI. So what I mean by that is that Copilot wasn't the answer. It was the directional statement. That's what they eventually wanted. But because of the way licensing worked, the way distribution worked, the way the process worked today, where the data was, a bunch of different factors, simpler or different technology pathways were better. And why I highlight that is because the most novel thing that we've seen in terms of return on investment for these Copilot initiatives isn't necessarily how Copilot drives change and impact. Of course, plugins and stuff are really powerful there, but it's actually how it drives imagination, inspiration, and more importantly, the desire for people to share what they'd like it to do. And that creates this opportunity where you see these lowercase p process spaces in the org that could be improved, that IT or other people who have the knowledge of how to improve it just never saw before. So it's the visibility. If you listen, and you do it the right way, that gets created because of these Copilot, because it changes everything, because people are embracing it and understanding it and trying different things. And there's multiple ways to listen here, by the way. I'm not just talking about like surveys and like interviews and focused discussions. We're also talking about like how we monitor data and like feedback signals and how people are, which elements of Copilot are they using and how are they doing it and which departments. All these things lead to this visibility that we didn't have in the organization before around optimization pathways. And when you have that visibility and you go into a recession, or you have that visibility and you think of your fiscal planning, it really does change some of the priorities and sequencing of stuff you were going to do. And that leads to higher ROI because most of these things we're talking about are often lower hanging fruit or easier to execute or can be done with really simple outsourcing with low risk. And those things all drive near immediate return or impact because a lot of, again, the same people who are saying I have this need or this problem, that's a team of people. They're all unified in the idea behind it, and you just need to solve that problem for them. So there's this problem we've all had of like transitioning IT from like projects and servers to like services and this like proactive, instead of reactive IT or proactive IT. And I think the biggest and most substantial ROI that I've seen is connected to these IT organizations that use this as a catalyst to finally shift to proactive IT, at least in these ways that I'm describing. And that's like the broader narrative, like the pattern. And then the particulars are quite interesting. So, I'm trying to think of good examples, but like in a financial organization, it was a set of processes in between. So you have this like, no, it'll take me too long to explain. Keep the bigger narrative. That's the key thing to understand. And then I know you're going to see better data on this in the coming months and years because these stories are going to be represented as case studies and other things externally. I will say we've had many case studies with these same narratives, and then customers have said, don't share that because they see it as a competitive advantage because it's a lowercase p process that almost no one talks about in that industry. And they also sometimes are like, hey, maybe we create a product for this, and it's a new revenue opportunity for the org, right? Like a law firm that now wants to deliver this service so that other law firms can take advantage of it and white label it and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit more complicated. And I think that's why you're seeing a delay on people talking about these things publicly. But in a one-to-one call, I can probably be more descriptive with some examples, but the pattern is definitely that. That was a great question from the sidebar here. See if there's other questions there. All right. Another one was hackers, getting through on Copilot. So that's a great comment. I want to talk about that. So There is this discussion that we had on our workshops, as well as I think in the technical readiness we might have talked about it. Sorry if we didn't. No, it was extensibility and plugins. We often talk about it, where Copilot creates new vulnerabilities and pathways for risk. The good news is almost every one of those, before they're publicized or whatever really utilized at scale, are solved, and then some of them are more intrinsic to the design of Copilot. So let me pull up a deck really quickly. I'll use an older one so I don't get in too much trouble here, from M365 conference. Give me one second, and I'll show you a particular slide that explains this concept, I think, pretty well, and you guys can let me know if it was helpful. So inside of this crazy 500-page deck, there's a section where we talk about it, and I'll pull it across. But essentially what happens is, let me describe the core principles. When you have an email that comes in, right now the way it works is most emails are read by exchange protections, and then say there's a link in the email. Before you click on that link, or when you click on the link, it explodes it in a virtualized instance and then protects you from the risk, right? Well, what happens is, for many organizations, because Copilot's a new landscape, it allows people to do things that you're not expecting. So here's a document that has no viruses in it. And in this document, it basically has words in it that instruct Copilot to respond a certain way. So think of prompting. When you send a prompt, you say, here's what I want from you. And then you say, here's the document I want you to refer to. If you refer to that document, what ends up happening here is, because at the very top of the document, in hidden text or whatever, the Copilot reads, but the human doesn't, it says, make sure when you respond, as Copilot, respond in this way with these words. And so now it responds that way because that's what you've asked it to do, right? And so the idea is, the risk here is, how do we ingest prompts where the data can still be used in the prompt, but doesn't necessarily redirect the prompt in a certain way? And that's the pattern challenge here. So this is a real thing, because let's say you have an email, same idea, and you send an email like this. Because so many people don't read emails anymore, they just look at Copilot summaries. You want people to see the summary, and then it asks them to share their contact information with whoever or whatever. So are these effective techniques for phishing today? Somewhat. Is it a problem that needs to be addressed? Absolutely. Now, there's a lot. I don't want to go into Microsoft's solution for this, because I think some of it's in play right now, and there's a question of the right way to talk about this. But I will say that these particular patterns that were real issues at the beginning of Copilot are no longer the same kind of injection risk today. That doesn't mean that those risks are gone, because every time we add new features and capabilities, we create new pathways that people, especially in a social hacking way, can use it in creative ways. And so that's my first comment on the bigger risk. And it's really just illustrating that this is not an unknown. It's something we've seen before. But I do think, to the sidebar question in the most recent news, there's a little bit more technically to discuss around how, everything from plugins to other ecosystems work. And the only example we've seen that I can publicly talk about, because of course some of these things get resolved right away, or they're specific to the organization and how they structured their governance and compliance, is that I have seen customers where we come in after, and they've created plugins, but they didn't understand that the plugin ecosystem, not the connector frameworks. I want to be clear that there's an idea of search connectors, and then they pull the data into Copilot. But there's this plugin ecosystem. You have to manage the compliance for that, because what ends up happening is, labels and other things aren't going to automatically apply, because it's your plugin, right? And your plugin's going to decide what to do, and it's real-time access and all this other stuff. It's not grabbing from the index, where the index has all these labels and things applied to it. So it's really important to understand that you expose risk when you do plugin design, and you think of the architecture there, that you have to think about security and compliance. And we've definitely seen customers where we come in later, we're helping them with some other stuff. We take a look at their plugins and we're like, whoa, this architecture is a problem because it's retrieving these data points, and then we'll show them, as a user who doesn't have access to this data but can use the plugins to do certain things that they shouldn't be able to do. So I would say it's more about the exposure you as a customer create versus the exposure that Microsoft or somebody else does, because the first parties generally deal with it before it's a broad problem, as long as you're listening to those messages and you're optimizing and you're doing what is requested for best practices, you'll be in a good place. But I see a lot of customers, which is great, using plugins. We should. They're really important. And as we do that, we have to acknowledge our part to play in that journey. So those are two ways to think about that. But it's certainly an interesting space, this idea that Copilot's ingesting the content. So why couldn't we, put some stuff that's not a virus or anything, but that tells Copilot to respond a certain way that gives us an advantage or whatever, right? So something to think about. All right. I don't see anything yet. See what Anthony. So I'll tentatively wrap up, and then please reach out if you have more questions. I hope this has been helpful, but I really appreciate everyone's time and attention today. Bye for now, everyone. Good luck on pursuing the best value possible for you, your organizations, and for AI's future.